My name is Farhad Dastur, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Psychology at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Tonight's topic is very interesting. It's on the psychology of conspiracy theories. I think it's important because conspiracy theories are very common throughout the world, and why people hold on to these very extreme views that don't seem to have any evidence behind them and yet are widely believed by all kinds of people is really something that psychologists and I think just in general people want to understand. What I hope people take from tonight's presentation is a deeper understanding of the psychology of conspiracy theories and just how our minds work and the kinds of errors that all of us can make that make us all susceptible to these kinds of beliefs.
Good evening. Welcome to Science World. Thank you all for coming this evening. I'm Andrea Durham. I'm Vice President of Exhibits, Digital, and Evaluation here at Science World. And I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for coming out. So at Science World, our mission is to engage British Columbians in science and to inspire science and technology leadership throughout our province. I came to Science World 2 years ago from Boston, and there were two things I noticed immediately. The first one was that the community of Vancouver has a tremendous love for Science World. Science World is truly and deeply loved by this community, and it was very impressive. The second thing I noticed is that British Columbia is a really big province. So when we think about delivering on our mission, we think about how we want to reach local people who both love Science World and want to access STEM education. So we want to increase access to STEM education for the people who want it. And we also want to reach greater types of audiences, all the way from birth. We're creating a new early learner gallery starting right at birth, all the way through lifelong learners. Then when we think about delivering our mission provincially, we have a lot of strategies for that. One is our digital initiatives. We have some terrific content that we deliver for anybody who wants to reach us around the province. We also have an amazing on-the-road team, or several teams, that go to the far reaches of the province and cause tremendous delight to everyone that they reach. And we have partnerships. And the partnerships really allow us to deliver the mission among like-minded STEM professionals. All of our partners have the same mission that we do, which is delivering great STEM education. And so partnerships like that with KPU, with other universities, with little tiny science centers around BC, with all types of organizations that share our mission, really allow us all to accomplish wonderful things and to get us toward that leadership position as a province. So the other thing I'd like to share is that, is that we want to be kind of a clubhouse and a gathering place for innovation and for people who want to move the cause forward. And so I would like to thank you all for joining us in our clubhouse tonight. We see ourselves as a gathering place, and we appreciate your coming out this evening. So I would now like to introduce Dr. Diane Purvey, Dean of the Faculty of Arts at KPU, and she will be introducing our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and special thank you to Science World for this partnership, which we're really grateful for. It's been a really fun project to work on, and we look forward to continuing it next year as well. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I'd like to acknowledge the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for their funding that they provided for this speaker series. As well as everyone involved with expanding science in our communities. Each of you will have received a bag tonight, and inside that bag there will be a survey, and I'd like you to fill it out. And at the bottom of the survey is something that you can fill out and put into a special draw. So I see some of you are doing that already, and don't forget to do it by the end of the night. So tonight is the 5th installment in the KPU Science World Speaker Series, and tonight's speaker is Dr. Farhad Dastur. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background and what he's doing now in terms of his research prior to his presentation. So Dr. Dastur was born in Kampala, Uganda. He traces his ancestry to India and before that to Persia. His family immigrated to Vancouver after Idi Amin exiled the country's South Asians. That experience inspired his first documentary film entitled Uganda, 1972, The South Asian Expulsion. Farhad is grateful to all the educators that helped him find the place where his curiosity, talent, and passion all converged. Mr. McKellar from Mountain Secondary's International Baccalaureate Program, Dr. John Pinnell, his undergrad supervisor at UBC, and Dr. Richard Brown, his PhD supervisor at Dalhousie University. And just as I know that Farhad has thanked those people who have mentored and supported him, I'd just like to acknowledge that Farhad is an incredible, a brilliant instructor and an incredible mentor to many people, both students, faculty, and I myself have actually benefited from his mentorship, so thank you for that. Today, Farhad is an educator and cognitive scientist in the psychology department at KPU. His research interests include evolutionary psychology, cognitive psychology, human factors, critical thinking, traffic safety, honeybee cognition, and open education. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Farhad Dastur, who will be speaking on Such Seething Brains, Such Shaping Fantasies, The Quest for Meaning in an Age of Anxiety, Conspiracies, and Superstitions. Welcome.
Thank you, Diane. Can you all hear me? Yes. Great. I just noticed that the first 3 rows, I know everyone, family, friends, past students, faculty. Every row after that, I know none of you. It's very bizarre. Well, you, I know you. I also don't have my glasses on, so I can't actually see that far. Welcome. Thank you to Science World. Thank you for coming out on a Wednesday evening. I know there's all kinds of other draws to your time, and so this is very special for me. I'm very excited about today's presentation, Such Seething Brains, Such Shaping Fantasies. It is a talk about the psychology of conspiracy theories. And so I hope you bring your favorite conspiracy theories tonight. We have about 30 minutes at the end of the presentation to talk about those and resolve them for you tonight, as I have done with the moon hoax. So in case you didn't know, there is the solution. I checked my horoscope today, February 10th. This is from astrology.com. You can go look it up. You can confirm everything. Tonight's talk is about critical thinking, so everything I say should be verified with evidence. You can check this out. It says, you've been working your fanny off to try to meet a goal. Trust me. And it might feel like no one has noticed your struggles at all. But before you hop on the self-pity express, stop and think about it. The reason that no one is reaching out to give you a helping hand is probably because they have faith you can handle it on your own. This is bizarre to me because I actually have no idea what I'm talking about today. I'm not an expert in conspiracy theories. I was just asked to do this. I had some free time. I mentioned some of the transformative educators who had made an impact in my life. And those educators were real people who I had taken classes with. But the person who really brought me into the world of science was this man, Carl Sagan, who introduced me to 2 aspects of science. The first was that science was about wonder. It was about the beauty and the complexity of the world, and that there was a way to access that world, a scientific method, a set of tools and thinking strategies and critical thinking approaches that helped us to interrogate nature, to ask very profound questions about nature, and also to answer them. Not to find truth. This is not philosophy, this is not religion, this is science, but to approach a better approximation of how we think the world works through observation and through experimentation. So that is the theme that permeates today's lecture, is that to understand this very interesting and yes, indeed, complicated phenomenon of conspiracy theories, which are worldwide, we can perhaps make some inroads by using the methods of science. And this quote from Carl Sagan, he's got so many quotes that are great, but I like this one for today's talk. Skeptical scrutiny is the means in both science and religion by which deep thoughts can be winnowed from deep nonsense. Did you like that? In case you didn't see it again, I spent a lot of time on that. There we go. Haley's comment. A roadmap. A roadmap is always good. We're going to talk about some examples of conspiracy theories. What is a conspiracy theory? 6 characteristics, and the psychology of conspiracy thinking. And also my theory of conspiracy theories. There's an image. And this image is connected to the title of the talk, such seething brains, such shaping fantasies. Does anyone know where that phrase comes from? Everyone should think about that, with the exception of our president, Dr. Alan Davis, who is a theater director, so I've already given you a clue. Shakespeare, which play?
The one with the Prospero in it.
Prospero, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. And I have to tell you, something bizarre happened when I was doing the research for this presentation. The quote was from Shakespeare. Shakespeare has nothing to do with the presentation. I just liked the quote. I thought it was relevant. And then I discovered there's a conspiracy about Shakespeare. Who knew? And he prefigured it in Julius Caesar, right? He said, "O conspiracy, shamest thou to show thy dangerous brow by night, when evils are most free?" So was it Shakespeare, or was it Sir Francis Bacon who wrote all of his plays? Or perhaps Edward de Vere? Or perhaps Sir Christopher Marlowe? And there's more. I don't understand this conspiracy theory, right? The conspiracy theory goes something like this. The person who wrote, Shakespeare wasn't smart enough, no one was smart enough to write all of those great plays, so someone else must have done it. Did I miss something? I'm probably doing that injustice, but it boils down to that. So what is a conspiracy theory? Let me give you one definition. There's no good definition, but this one works for the purpose of tonight. Definition 1 is that it is a secret plan by a powerful group to cause harm to others. In other words, government. Definition 2, the unnecessary assumption of conspiracy when other explanations are more probable. Who likes 1? 2? A bunch of conspiracy theorists tonight. I don't think they're very helpful. They help us start to think about conspiracy theories, but I think this is a better way to think about it. So think of your favorite conspiracy theory, and then compare it to these 6 characteristics and see if these 6 characteristics match. So the first is that the conspiracy theory needs to lack consistent and compelling evidence. In fact, this is quite consistent with a lot of the different theories. They tend not to present a compelling alternative theory about the event. They tend to pick holes at the mainstream theory. And they say, see, we can't explain why, this little aspect didn't work, so the whole conventional narrative must be a lie, right? And then maybe after the fact, they'll come up with their own theory of what actually caused it. There are almost always more plausible explanations. It's just that you don't believe them because they're coming from the powers that be. Now, sometimes there's not a good plausible explanation at the time. Think Malaysian Airlines 370, right? The experts weren't even coming up with a conventional explanation. Everyone was saying, we have no idea what happened here. Well, that just opens the playing field for all kinds of conspiracies to walk right within minutes, right? The plane had landed somewhere, they had machine gunned all the passengers. Who knows? Aliens had taken it to the moon. Just bizarre. Conspiracy theories assume deception and misinformation. We'll come back to this one, it's an important one. They also concern important events, okay? So if you were, coming here today and you were looking for parking and someone stole your parking spot, not a conspiracy theory, not an important event. It was important for you, but it's got to be bigger than that. And the conspiratorial group is always very powerful and shadowy. Think the Bilderbergs, think the Rothschilds. And interestingly, conspiracy theories are immune to change. They are a closed belief system. They are a theory coated in Teflon. The more you challenge the conspiracy theory, the more slippery it becomes. They are not open to a conversation or a dialogue. If you put forward contrary evidence, they'll do two things. They'll either deny the evidence by claiming you're with them, or, very cleverly, they'll absorb that contrary evidence, twist it, and make it evidence in support of the theory, the conspiracy theory. Very interesting. Here are some common conspiracy theories. Now, using our critical thinking skills again, and this is very important for all the students here, especially, you will understand that this is data collected from polls. Data collected from polls is not very good, right? Why not, Elizabeth? Tierney.
Self-selection.
There's self-selection. The type of question you ask can be misleading or guiding. When you ask the question, how you ask the question, was it by telephone, was it in a mall, in person, was it over the internet? All of these kinds of methodological issues can alter responses, and you might get quite widely different response rates. So bear that in mind when you look at any of the data I present to you today. My plea to you today is to take everything I say and all the data I show you and also think about it critically. Because if you don't, then I've not achieved anything, right? The whole purpose is to unleash this type of approach to thinking about knowledge, which is a critical approach, an approach that says it's not about what you think, it's about how you think, right? And it's about thinking for yourself. As Emerson said, beware when God lets loose a thinker. So with that in mind, bearing in mind that this is data from 2006, so it's already 10 years old, it's single poll data of US voters, because it's just so fun to get data from the States. JFK's assassination was a conspiracy. 51% of Americans say yes. That's actually pretty low. A lot of polls put that even higher depending on the time it's taken. Climate change is a hoax, 37%. I'm waiting to hear gasps in the audience as people go, what? It is. There is a secretive elite conspiring to rule the world through an authoritarian government, the so-called New World Order. 28% believe that. There's a government cover-up of a UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. 21% believe that. The population of Canada is 36 million, roughly. 10% of the American voting population of 218 million is approximately 22 million, right? In other words, there are 44 million Americans who believe in a government cover-up of UFO. There are more UFO believers in the States than there are people in our country. And 20% believe in a link between childhood vaccinations and autism, and I know this is Professor Peterson's pet peeve. And the moon landing, thankfully, only 7%. It's gone down. Moon landing, the fake moon landing. So, what are some conspiracy theories? Well, of course, there's a massive government cover-up. UFOs are real, and the government knows it. There's your proof, right there. So we've dealt with that one. They're not very smart alien. They could get halfway across the galaxy, but they can't make themselves invisible to us. Right? Like you think either they would be completely invisible, and you wouldn't have all this evidence out there, pictures at night, and people being abducted and having experiments done, and all this kind of circumstantial. You wouldn't have all of that. You just wouldn't know, or they'd be like, yeah, we're here, and we're gonna, turn the pyramids upside down to prove it, right? But it's not clear on either side. It's in that middle zone of ambiguity and uncertainty, and the spacecraft always look like hubcaps from 1957 Buicks that have been thrown up, and bad cameras, and it's weird. I mean, even that, really? Now, this guy knows a thing or two about science. This is Stephen Hawking, perhaps one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. And if you can't read that, let me read it for you. If governments are involved in covering up the knowledge of aliens, then they are doing a much better job of it than they seem to be doing at anything else. The John F. Kennedy assassination, 1963, is probably the conspiracy that has the most number of strange theories around it, and has a very high rate of belief. Some of you may have been alive when this happened, and you might remember that event. Here's some data from very shortly after the event happened, taken in increments over time, right up to 2013. So very shortly after the assassination, 46% of Americans, this red line here, say there's a broader plot. When asked this question, do you feel the Kennedy assassination was the work of one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, or was it part of a broader plot? And 46% just shortly after believe, yeah, there's something else going on here. And then it starts to rise quite steeply, reaching 80% in the 80s, and then coming down, but still remaining very high, even 50 years later. With much more evidence, much more information out, right? Still a very, very high preponderance. The people who believe in one man, 34% after the death, dips down to 13%, comes back up to almost the same level in 2013 as when it originally happened. And the people who have no opinion, 20%, and they're all. So in other words, at no point in American history are there ever more people who believe in the one plot theory than in the conspiracy theory? Ever. And here are some of the theories. Now I apologize, you might not be able to read all that, but I wanted to show you the number of theories. It was a mafia, organized crime, gangster conspiracy. It was the US government, CIA, Fidel Castro, special interests who disagreed with his policies, political groups, the Ku Klux Klan, Lyndon Johnson, the Soviet Union, multiple people, another country, big business, secret oil, FBI, labor unions, military-industrial complex, anti-government, other, no opinion. The three big ones, the Mafia, the US government, and the CIA, and Castro up there too. So here's a newspaper headline from the day. Assassin kills Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson sworn in. This is the Chicago Tribune on the day it happened. But I think we need a different newspaper headline. That's the accurate one. And note, he was shot 129 times from 43 different angles. This explains the grassy knoll. And of course, Princess Diana, the assassination conspiracy there, and there's multiple ones. This is particularly big in England, obviously. One of the big ones is that SAS, which is their MI6 Special Air Service hit squad, did kill Diana. And researchers at the University of Kent, Michael Wood and his colleagues, did a research study on a number of different conspiracies, and they asked a question about whether you believed in Diana being a victim of conspiracy. And what they found was very bizarre. They found that people who believed that she had faked her own death were also more likely to believe that she was killed. Think about that for a moment. That's not possible. And this is very curious. If you are a student of psychology, right, a student of the mind, not officially a student, if you're interested in the mind and the behavior, how is it possible that otherwise reasonable, well-adjusted people, and these are not people who have got mental disorders, how could they believe in two mutually contradictory conspiracy theories? And there's an answer to that. Do you want to know? Oh, okay. The answer is that what they are actually doing is they're believing in a super theory, a theory above the conspiracy theory. It's called a monological belief system. And what it means is it is a single grand worldview that typically goes something like this. You can't trust government. Okay? And if you can't trust government and you can't trust big business or big pharma or big government or big daycare or any big, right? If you can't trust them, then any story that comes out of them is false. So I can believe your conspiracy theory that she faked her own death, or that it was Dodi Fayed's business partners, or it was MI6, or it was the Queen with a silencer going out to get her. Whatever you want, it doesn't matter, because they're not, the person who's having the conspiracy theory isn't comparing the different conspiracy theories to each other. They're comparing them to the bigger grand view, and they always make sense with the bigger grand view. This is why it's so frustrating talking to conspiracy theorists. You want to bang your head against the wall because it's completely illogical, and you can't poke holes in their arguments with logic. They don't care. They're not working on the same planet as you. 9/11 was an inside job conspiracy. There is so much written on this one, I'm not even going to even touch it. There was a weird laughter from the back room. Did you hear that? When I said that? That's weird. The vaccines cause autism conspiracy. Professor Peterson, who's behind this?
Well, that's Andrew Wakefield.
That would be Andrew Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy. What are her credentials? A porn star. What are his credentials? Right, so about at the same level, right? Oh, and look at the line. This is from CNN. Jenny's son, Evan, was diagnosed with autism when he was 2. He also took the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, right? So you see the thinking, right? He took the vaccine, he got autism, right? Cause and effect, direct. One case study. There's some evidence he doesn't even have autism, by the way. Notice that children typically get vaccines. Well, that's redundant. You get vaccines when you're a child, and you typically get diagnosed with autism when you're a child. Right? These are events that tend to happen together, so you get illusory correlations. If there's a real correlation at all, and we're not even saying there is, right? But we can dismiss her to the extent that she's not a credible source. We can't dismiss her in the sense that she knows how to play the media, so she'll have a much bigger megaphone than he will have, right? Because she's telegenic and photogenic and all of that, and she's a mother, and how can you say that she's lying? Her son has autism and all of that. So she's going to do a lot of damage with her views. He's going to do a different kind of damage with his views. He's a respectable surgeon in England, right? And he published a paper in The Lancet, no less. Professor Bernstein, is The Lancet a good journal? One of the best medical journals. He published this article, Ileal lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children. In other words, vaccines cause autism. But look, The Lancet retracted the article because they realized this was not good science. And why was it not good science? Well, students who take critical thinking and research methods and statistics, you will appreciate this because it wasn't an experimental design, right? Bert Sager, what does that mean? If it's not an experimental design, you can't have a causal attribution. And the sample size was 12. What does that mean? Low power, you're going to have a very hard time creating internal validity. And there were invasive procedures used on the children without ethical approval. That alone should discredit it. But the worst was that he falsified data. But why would he falsify? He's a surgeon. Why would he risk falsifying data? What's the motive here? And we know what the motive is. He had a conflict of interest. He had a fiduciary conflict of interest. He was being paid by the lawyers who had been hired by the parents who were suing the vaccination companies for giving their kids autism. And he didn't disclose that. And that's a problem in science. It's a problem anywhere, but it's a problem particularly in science because it compromises his objectivity, his neutrality, and therefore his credibility. And The Lancet took the paper back and said, this is not good science, do not believe what he has said, but guess what? The damage had been done. And after this paper, and I know this is just a correlation, but after this paper, vaccination rates started to drop in the United States, in England, and in Canada. And rates of measles went up, and mumps went up. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation there, but it's disturbing. That's something to consider. This is probably the single most damaging falsified research paper in medical science, probably. Something lighter?
I like that one, though.
You believe it?
No.
No? But it's good. It's good, right? So this is Donald Trump, in case you don't know him. And this is his wedding. And he is invited, what's her name again? Hillary and Bill have been invited to the wedding, and therefore they are in conspiracy together. Oh, he was also seen playing golf with Bill, and I think he had a telephone conversation with Hillary. So it's a sealed deal, right? So he's not even a card-carrying member of the Republican Party. And so for the establishment Republican Party, which is the words the media uses, right? Perfect conspiracy theory narrative. He's destroying them. You know, he's had affairs. He's not an upstanding, evangelical. He must be a secret weapon of the Democrats who have been sent to destroy us from within. And here's a quote from Richard Hofstadter, my cousin Zubin. Do you remember this quote from poli-sci? This was from The Paranoid Style in American Politics. This is a great quote. I call it the paranoid style simply because no other word adequately evokes the sense of heated exaggeration, suspiciousness, and conspiratorial fantasy that I have in mind. 1964. Not much has changed. Chemtrails! I like this one. Have you looked up at the sky and seen a plane and seen the trails, right? This is science world, so I have to say this. We understand how these are caused, right? It's heated water vapor that crystallizes, condenses on fine particles in the atmosphere and forms, cloud. We've known this for a long time, right? These are just clouds. But this conspiracy theory says, no, there are vats of chemicals in the cargo hold of the plane, and at some point the pilot flicks the switch, which means all the pilots are in on this conspiracy, but have never said anything, and releases this chemical, which then rains down upon us, although it never does, right? Have you noticed that? It just disappears. But anyway, it rains down upon us, and it's the government's way of controlling our minds. So wear your tin hat, right? But here's the fundamental problem I have with this one. If you were so smart and you were going to, on a global scale, infiltrate people's minds by having this rain down on them, wouldn't you do this? Wouldn't you get your chemist to create an invisible chemtrail? Not one that leads right back to the source for everyone to see. He did it. And then there are darker ones. Of course, this is one that has a long history, the worldwide Jewish conspiracy. And so, looking at the chemtrails ones, which we can laugh at, this one we can't laugh at. Conspiracy theories have real-world consequences in terms of politics, in terms of how we treat other people, how we see other people, how we then create laws and other kinds of interventions. Here is Adolf Hitler speaking to the Reichstag in 1941, just before Operation Barbarossa. Now the time has come to confront the plot of the Anglo-Saxon Jewish warmongers. It goes on and it's terrible, and you can imagine. But out of this continuing narrative, which has a longer history than, of course, the Nazis, so playing on an existing cultural fear and phobia, and then getting the propaganda machine behind that at a time when Germany is recovering economically and they've lost World War I, and so the people are looking for something to rally around and looking for someone to blame for their own problems. We then get the burning of synagogues on Kristallnacht, and then the burning of actual Jews in the ovens, and worse. So there are real-world negative consequences to conspiratorial thinking. But if you can get people to believe in your conspiracy, Voltaire said, you can get them to do absurd things, and they will justify it. They will think they're doing the right thing. They will think they're protecting themselves or their nation. And of course, not all conspiracies are false or even unreasonable. Remember him? Richard Nixon and the break-in of the Democratic National Convention at the Watergate Hotel, and amongst other things. There was a lot of things that went on there, leading to his impeachment and his resignation. I actually went back to YouTube. I watched his resignation speech. It's very interesting. He's such a classic, egotistical politician. He, at no point in his resignation speech does he look at the camera and look at the American people and say, I am sorry for betraying you. He never says anything like that. What he says is, I am resigning as president because I have lost the confidence of Congress. Wow. Talk to Obama. He didn't resign. He never had the confidence of Congress. That's why you resigned? And it doesn't help that governments are secretive. They can't help it. Thank you, Edward Snowden. Thank you, Julius Assange. Is there a Nobel Prize for speaking truth to power? So what do conspiracy believers look like? Well, if you would not mind, just look to the person to your right and then your left. And then if you have a mirror, just look into that. They look like him and her and her and him. And Kitty. So they cut across gender, they cut across age, they cut across ethnicity, they cut across income, education level, political affiliation, religion. By the way, which of these really is the conspiracy theorist? Anyone know?
Is it that one? Yeah, the white guy.
Of course it's that one. That's Alex Jones, who runs a right-wing website and news show and a website called InfoWars. Don't look it up. But he has not met a theory that isn't a conspiracy theory. This guy's just trying to protect himself. So believers in conspiracies, yeah, they're everywhere. They're believed in all peoples, regardless of demographics. That's interesting from a sociological and psychological point of view. Now, the rates and types of conspiracies will vary according to demographic group. So when I say all of those people are susceptible to conspiracy theories, that's true, but they're not susceptible to the same ones or in the same way. For example, ethnic minorities in the United States and United Kingdom are much more likely to believe in certain kinds of conspiracies where they see themselves as the target, either of government policy or of some kind of social policy or cultural issue. And so you get this very strange finding. A survey of African American churchgoers by the Southern Leadership Congress found that 35%, this is astonishing to me, believe that the CIA created the HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, in order to commit genocide on African Americans. That's 35%. Let's say we're wrong. Let's say that data's not even, let's call it 17%, half. That's still ridiculous. It should be 0.2%, which is, the background rate of paranoid delusional schizophrenia or something like that, right? No, these are normal people who, just go to work and have families and vote and believe the government is out to commit genocide on them through their own CIA. It doesn't help that the media is all over this stuff. Here's Jesse Ventura and his TV show Conspiracy Theory. Here's the X-Files, which, by the way, filmed at Kwantlen's Langley campus last week. Clearly, therefore, Kwantlen administration, never mind, the president's here. Did you get paid, Alan, for that? He's being wise and not saying anything. And Ancient Aliens. Have anyone watched Ancient Aliens? Yeah. It's an interesting one, right? So they basically this is what they do. They look at the Nazis. They say the Nazis had incredible technology at the end of World War II, but they couldn't have done it themselves, so it must have been ancient aliens that helped them. There. Is that a fair assessment? Which just takes the problem of, wow, how did they have such high technology, and just shifts it over one step and says, wow, how did we get ancient aliens? Right? But the solution is more complicated than the original problem, right? It's not a solution to the problem, it's a worse problem. How did ancient aliens get here? How come they're secret? Right? Why just the Nazis? So this kind of constant, 24/7 news cycle, if it leads, it bleeds, media journalism, have fanned the flames of conspiratorial thinking. Here's an interesting series of data. This is trust in government. This was a series of different polls, Gallup and other organizations, that looked at how much Americans trusted their own government. And what we find is that in the early 1960s, trust is at an all-time high, right? Over 70%. And then what happens to Kennedy? He dies, right? So we've got all-time high trust. Kennedy dies, and trust starts to go down because we've got the formation of all these conspiracy theories. It was inside job. It was Lyndon B. Johnson, right? And then Nixon gets impeached, and trust just plummets, right, through the Nixon and the Ford presidencies. And then we get Carter, and we've got the problems with the Iran hostages and the debacle in the rescue attempt. And then Reagan comes along, and he renews a sense of faith in America and patriotism and rebuilds the military, and it's good times. And trust in government goes back up. And then George Bush, H.W. Bush Sr. comes in, and there's the first Gulf War, and there's the tech bubble crash, and it goes down. And Clinton comes back in, and trust goes back up, and it's good times in America, right? Remember that quote? Unemployment's at record low levels, we've got a surplus budget, we're not at war, and we're not going to take it anymore. So popularity is good, and then I couldn't find a different picture. Really, I tried. Plummets. And then Obama comes in, right? The Muslim president from Africa, remember him? What do you think happens to trust? It goes down, and then it goes up. And then it bounces, right? It's not clear where Americans feel. But notice something interesting about this data. This is why I think it's very important to look at historical data, not just a single poll at a certain period of time, because historical data will show you patterns. Look at the pattern. Down, up, down, up, down, up. You can almost make a prediction about what's going to happen next based on how the Americans are feeling currently, right? Which is part of what psychologists do, right? They say, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right? So every day, coming back to this theme, we are inundated with images that tell us to be afraid, right? To be afraid of the world, of nature, of each other, of ourselves, right? Fear of climate change. Exactly, thank you. Fear other countries. What country am I going to put up there? Japan? Where are you? Russia, right? That's what he really looks like. Who else? Who else should we fear? China. That's from the Chinese version of King Kong. That's what they show their people. Of course, what a great lineup of images there, right? You've got the present leader, you've got the Ayatollah hovering above him, and you've got a nuclear weapon. You don't need a caption for this one, right? That one does it all by itself. And then you got this leader with, yeah. So we've got a lot of choice here. And so we just cycle through them, right? But you're right, Bert, right? Before it was Japan, remember? We actually dropped a bomb on them, right? And then we bought all their cars and all their computers. It's very bizarre. These cycles, right? You're our friends, you're our enemies, you're our friends. It doesn't matter. For anyone living in Vancouver, you'll appreciate that. Let me show you that again. Right? Student debt, just put in student there, right? Kwantlen student, no, not right. No. The people who took the photos were Kwantlen students. They have a job. Fear global economic crisis. Look at the data. What is the data saying? The data is saying a steady decline in the valuation of the Canadian dollar relative to the US dollar, right? Over a 3-year period, just downhill. That loony is diving, right? No, look at the full data. The full data tells a different story. You have no idea how long that took to do. 4-second graphic was like 3 hours. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And if you're older than 15, you will remember this, right? There were times when it was really good. So, but if you're into conspiracy theories, make sure you show your fellow conspiracists just this data, because you need to massage the numbers. Fear crime. You better fear crime. Why? Because the statistics tell you that crime is out of control. It's at an all-time high. Look at the crime rates. The crime rates are, the total crime rate's going down ever since the 1990s. Oh, property crime rates going down ever since the 1990s. Oh, violent crime rate. Oh, that's other criminal crime rates, pretty much stable and low, and violent crime rates stable and low. This is Canadian data, right? From 1990s. Down, down, down. And the American data is fairly consistent with this. There are individual crimes that are actually going up, like cybercrime, for example, right? Terrorism crime probably going up. But these are the ones that really affect you, and they're all going down. But that's not the narrative of politicians. That's not what you read in the newspaper. There's no headline saying crime at an all-time low. Fear disease. Now put Zika here. Just cross out whatever it is and just put in the new one. Fear terrorism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab. It doesn't help when the terrorists make videos like this, right? Because they understand. That's what terrorism. Terrorism is only this. It's psychological fear induction, right? And you get way more mileage out of that than trying to fight with weapons. Because what do, right? We send a smart bomb via a drone from a pilot in Nevada, and we launch it to some village in Pakistan. What do? They just come through our television, right? Who's operating the drones here, right? Or the internet? And it works. But let's have a reality check because we're critical thinkers. Here's data from 2004 to 2013. This is from the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. This is American deaths by firearms on U.S. soil, and this is the total American deaths by terrorism, not including soldiers. Year after year. For 2013, for which we have the latest data, 33,000 deaths by firearms and 21 deaths by terrorism. Let's do the sum. Let's just calculate the overall numbers from 2004 all the way to 2013. The total rate, 316,000 deaths by firearms, versus a total of 313 deaths by terrorism. Yet poll after poll, when you ask Americans today, what is the number one fear that you have, what is the country's number one concern, it's not firearms, it's ISIS. So guess where you've entered? What does psychology have to say about all this? Well, it says that people believe in conspiracies regardless of demographics, so it's a phenomenon that affects all of us, and that we tend to feel alienated from political culture, the people who are most susceptible to this. This is like a behavioral psychological profile of a people susceptible to conspiracies. They tend to be mildly paranoid. They have a deep distrust of authority. Study after study shows that one. And in terms of personality traits, they're relatively more open to experience. That's an interesting one. That was counterintuitive to me, but they actually are more likely to listen to information from a number of sources, to seek different experiences, to be a bit more imaginative. And if a person backs one conspiracy theory, they are much more likely to back other conspiracy theories, and we saw with the Lady Diana one, even if they're contradictory or just have nothing to do with the original conspiracy theory you believe. So it tends not to be the case that people believe that 9/11 was an inside job and then think everything else is just fine conventional story. No, if you believe in one, you're much more likely to believe in all of the other ones. And that's probably explained by that belief in the monological belief system, worldview, right? Because there's something out there. There's a large, secret, shadowy, sinister plot out there that is controlling a lot of these events in the world. And then belief in other forms of magical thinking, by which I mean superstitions, the paranormal, the supernatural, biblical prophecy, or prophecy from any religious holy book, could be the Quran, could be whatever, correlate with conspiracy beliefs. If you believe in any of these, you're much more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. And then psychologists have also studied something very interesting about the human mind. We have cognitive biases. We don't look at the world and everything is neutral and equal. We actually attend to certain things and we ignore other things. We remember selectively certain types of information. We don't remember other kinds of information. If it's personally relevant to us, we remember it. If it's very powerful or traumatic or emotionally meaningful, we remember it. If it's not those things, it tends not to get remembered. There's a cognitive bias called agenticity. What this means is that we tend to ascribe a personal agency or a volition to even inanimate things or to things we don't understand. If we perceive a pattern or something's going on, we say someone is behind that. That's agenticity. Then there's something called patternicity. That's a term coined by the skeptic Michael Shermer. The more technical term is pareidolia. And that is the tendency to see patterns where none exist. We're very good at this. If there's a takeaway little motto, the mind is a pattern seeker. It is designed to look for pattern. There is another psychological phenomena called apophenia. This was coined by the German psychiatrist Klaus Conrad, from the Greek words apo and phenia, meaning away and to show. And Conrad was studying paranoid delusional schizophrenics and discovered that they had these grand, creative, very interesting, bizarre theories about the world that looked like an epiphany. They got it. They understood that how everything connected, but it's not an epiphany because it's not real. So it's an apophany. It's away from reality, but it still has that resemblance to an epiphany of an integration, a synthesis of all kinds of disparate facts into one coherent narrative. It's just that the narrative is crazy. The tendency to give meaning to meaningless pattern. And then there's another bias called proportionality bias. It's very simple. Big events have big causes. The tendency to attribute great causes to great events. So 9/11, 19 terrorists funded by some guy in Afghanistan versus the Bush administration wanting to create a pretext to go to war with Iraq and between the two or whatever, right? If it was big, it must have had a big cause. Lee Harvey Oswald. How could one guy do that? It must have been a conspiracy. And then there's the confirmation bias, which psychologists have studied quite a bit. And this is simply the tendency to search for or pay attention or remember information that already confirms to our pre-existing beliefs. We seek that which we believe. It's not, seeing isn't believing. Believing is seeing. So the mind is a pattern detector. Let me prove that to you. Do you see a random bunch of black and white? Or do you see an object in there? A dog, someone said? Yeah, what kind of dog? A Dalmatian. There he is. You see a river? Yeah, sure. And it doesn't matter. You can see whatever you want because the mind is a pattern detector. I'm not going to say there's no river in there. There's no river in there. Okay? Yeah. Okay. What do you see here? You just shout it out, whatever.
Panda.
Panda? Anyone else? No one's going to go there. Anyone see anything here? Let me give you a hint. One of these actually does have an image. Okay, this is called the snowy picture task. You take an object, you degrade it, and in half of the stimuli and the other half of the stimuli, it's just random noise like on your TV, and you show it to people and you say, what do you see? I see crosses. Crosses, yeah, okay. You know, the interesting thing about psychology too is once you tell a person what to look for, boom, it just pops out. I'm going to tell you what to look for. It's a chair. You see that? Oh, yeah, of course. If you ever see this again, you will only see a chair in a river. There's nothing in here, I think. How would we know, right? Yeah. There was an interesting study done back in 2008 and published in another good journal, Science. Would you say Science is a good journal, Professor Bernstein? Very good journal. And in this study, they had people do a cognitive task, and in half the group, okay, so I said that I knew everyone in the first 3 rows, so you're my experimental group, and everyone else, I kind of know some, but not all, you're the control group, okay? So you guys, you do this difficult cognitive task, and I give you feedback that is accurate. I say, yeah, you're doing well, yes, you got a right answer, no, you got a wrong answer, okay, I do that. With that group, you do the same cognitive task, and I give you random feedback. Right? You get the answer right, I tell you, well, it's wrong, maybe sometimes it's right. So you get frustrated. And then you start to get anxious, and then you get a sense of loss of control. What's going on? It doesn't matter what I do. The feedback is completely random. Maybe I'm going crazy, or how hard is this? What's going on, right? So you induce uncertainty in that group of people. You then give them a test on uncertainty, and you prove that, yes, you have actually elevated uncertainty. So that's called a manipulation check. You actually confirm that. And then you do something really interesting. You give them images like this to look at. You give the out-of-control loss of certainty group these images, and guess what? Way more of them see illusory patterns here, but there's none compared to the control group. But they also develop more superstitions. Interesting. And they perceive more conspiracies when you give them little narratives to read. And they form illusory correlations when you give them stock market data. And then you do something really clever, right? It's like an inoculation. What you say to the people who you've induced uncertainty in, who are doing all of this, you say, remember a time when you had a lot of control in your life. Remember an experience. Just think about that experience. And so they think about it. And then you give them the test again. And guess what? None of this happens. It all disappears. They go back to being like controls. So you turn it on and you turn it off. That's interesting. I think it's interesting. Is it interesting? What am I just talking to myself here? So the loss of control activates the unpleasant feeling, which leads to a compensatory perceptual search for order and meaning. Interesting. And that's the source of the article if you're interested in reading it. Loss of control activates an unpleasant feeling, which activates a compensatory cognitive mechanism to impose order on the world to make things good again. And this study has been repeated in many different scenarios and different kinds of settings. And so one of them was really bizarre. They took parachutists who were about to jump out of an airplane, and they said, could you look at some pictures? And the parachutists saw more patterns, right? I mean, if I was doing that study, I would have just said, can you look at the clouds? It's easier, right? But that's interesting. So you can do this with many people. Soldiers just about to go off to war, that have never been to war. Anything that creates a sense of anxiety and uncertainty. The pattern-seeking mind. Which famous person do you see in this cinnamon bun? Now, if you know it, don't say anything. You will never look at a cinnamon bun the same way again. It's astonishing, isn't it? And it's not like they didn't, make it to look like her, right? What is that when you make a cinnamon? What is that called?
Cinnamon bun?
Rolling. Yeah. They didn't roll it. I can't access simple words right now. What have I been rolling? That's right. I love that. What do you see here? A face. Good. You have a normally active mind. Very good. Where is this face? Anyone know? Mars. And it's the face in Mars illusion, conspiracy, created by aliens so that we would know eventually one day when we had telescopes or spacecraft to go there, that there are aliens on Mars. So this is a photo taken by the 1976 first mission to Mars, Viking 1, guess who the science officer was on that mission? Carl Sagan. It was a low-resolution photo of the Cydonia landform on Mars. And it's pretty unmistakable. There's Matt Damon. Here is the same Cydonia landform taken in 1998 by a high-resolution camera on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter with a resolution of 0.3 meters at 300 kilometers. This is 0.3 meters. That's astonishingly good. That's better than Google Earth, right? At 300 kilometers, right? And the face has started to disappear, right? I mean, if you see a vague face there, it's probably because I've just primed you with this face, right? But there really is no face. And this is the thing. When you're faced with uncertainty, this is uncertainty because it's ambiguous. The resolution is bad. It's splotchy. It's got shadow and light, and it's not a clear image. When you've got uncertainty, what does the mind do? It projects order and coherence on the world, and it particularly likes to look for faces because faces are meaningful to humans, right? Faces give us important information. Babies need to recognize faces, and they do recognize faces very early after birth. Imagine you're out camping and you've gone to collect firewood. This is a particularly good Canadian analogy. And it's getting dark and a little bit foggy, so we've got the conditions being set up. And you hear a noise, right? Well, what do you do when you hear that noise? There's a number of decisions that you can make. Some of these decisions are going to be good, and some are not going to be good. What if it's wolves? What would you do? What would you do? Well, here's one thing you could do. You could say, well, here's one outcome. You could detect the wolves, you could see them or hear them, and say, those are wolves. This is the wild. I better run. And if you made that decision, that's called a hit, okay? And you survive. You've made a good decision. Or you could say, there are no wolves. Let's say there really aren't any wolves. And you say, yeah, there's no wolves. It's just the wind in the leaves. And you just carry on your way. Okay, you do nothing. Good, you also survive. Those are two good decisions. And the reality is that there are wolves or that there aren't wolves. But there's two errors that you could make too. Two errors that our perceptual cognitive system are susceptible to making in conditions of uncertainty. Here's the first one. You could have a false alarm. What this means is that you think there are wolves when in fact there aren't. And you run. And what's the consequence of that? Nothing. you just got a little tired and you got a little bit of cardio, right? Maybe you sprained your ankle at the most, right? But it's fine. You've made an error, but it hasn't had a big consequence on you. But there's another type of error that you can make. It's called a false rejection or a miss. And that is that there really are wolves behind you and you didn't detect them. Or you kind of did, but you did nothing. You thought, no, that's not real. It's just some rustling, right? In that situation, you die. From an evolutionary point of view, this is important because the people who make this decisions, the people in the past who make this decision don't leave descendants, right? They're pulled out of the gene pool. The people who make these decisions live and procreate and have offspring who also tend to behave like this. And what we have is evolution shaping the mind, designing the mind to be sensitive to making correct detections, correct rejections, and false alarms, because we're trying to avoid this situation. And that's what you all have. You are all the successful, descendants of ancestors who made decisions like this. All of you, by definition. Every one of your ancestors survived long enough to have an offspring. So this is a big, big error that you can make. But this is the interesting one, because doesn't this look a little bit like conspiracy theory? Saying there is something when there isn't, detecting a pattern, giving it agency, purpose. It's dark, it's shadowy, it's sinister. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because I don't. If you could tell me where I'm going with it, I've sort of lost my track. Here's my view. My view is that the origins of conspiracy thinking are in the shadows of our ancestors. Our minds are pattern detectors designed to help us survive a natural world full of danger and a social world full of danger. In fact, today the social world is more dangerous than it ever has been. You need to watch out for people at work who are conspiring against you, who are manipulating you, who are deceiving you, companies and governments and groups who want your money or your time or your attention or your resources or whatever, right? And so we have perceptual systems that are finely attuned to gossip, right? And to looking at people's faces. And is there a discrepancy between what you're saying and how you're saying and what you're telling me with your nonverbal behavior? And why are those people gathering all the time whenever I'm around? What are they talking about? And what's this email about? It wasn't supposed to be sent to me, and there's something going on here. Conspiracies abound, and some of them are real. And we're sensitive to them, because if you're not sensitive to them, the consequence is very bad. But if you are sensitive and you're wrong, so what? You're just paranoid then, right? You just live with more anxiety. So we are biased to search for and pay attention to and remember certain kinds of information. This is my view. So let me put it all together in one theoretical model, my theory of conspiracy theory. It starts with fear, anxiety, mistrust, and uncertainty. If you can activate that, and it's easy to activate that, just ask Donald Trump how to do it. Very easy to do that. And if you have certain personality traits, we talked about a few of those, a little bit of paranoia, a little bit of openness to experience, and there's others. There's not been a tremendous amount of research yet into the psychology of conspiracy theories, so we're still learning more. But if you have certain personality traits, that's going to be part of it. And and it's not if you have some of these cognitive biases, you all have these cognitive biases. Patternicity, agenticity, confirmation bias. There's other ones too. That's just built in with the equipment. And if you live in a political and a cultural environment, think Nazi Germany, think today's Islamophobia culture, think the Japanese internment before World War II here in Canada and BC. If you live in an environment where the politicians and your leaders, religious and political and otherwise, and educators are all telling you that there's a group out there that's trying to harm you, and they're doing it secretly. It's a cabal, and they're out to undermine what we believe in, what we cherish. If you live in that environment, you're going to believe in a conspiracy. You can't help but it. You're designed to. So how should you talk to a conspiracy theorist if you really have to? My advice is don't. Okay? It won't go anywhere. Okay? You're probably wasting your time. No conspiracy believer has ever changed their mind, has ever given up their theory because you presented logical knowledge or information. You have that one piece of evidence that if they just could believe it, boom, they'd flip over. Doesn't happen. If they're extreme conspiracy believers, if they're sort of on the edge, you might be able to convince them. There is maybe a little bit of hope there. Create some cognitive dissonance and give them a source that's reputable and just keep assailing them. Those ones you might be able to work with. We can talk about that in the question period. Don't challenge their claims. Why? Because you'll end up reinforcing their theory, and they will just view you as one of them. It occurred to me, Diane, that at some point, teaching at Kwantlen after so many years and being in administration, I became one of them. I don't know when it was, but there was a point when you're one of them too. So I have some closing thoughts. And the solution, as in most things, is education, right? I would say that, wouldn't I? How self-serving is that? Come to Kwantlen. This is my pitch. I was told to say all of this. We've got 3 degrees in psychology. We've got fantastic instructors, several of them in their room. Would you stand up? Danny Bernstein, please stand up. Corey Peterson, please stand up. Who else is here? Put your hand up at least. Anyone else? I don't have my glasses on. Is Levi here? Oh, Gira Bat, Diane Crisp. Levi Orban? Great. You? Yes. So, education in science. Science World told me to say this one. Education in science to teach the incredible beauty and complexity of nature. Education in the arts. The dean told me to say this one. To teach about the incredible beauty and complexity of the human condition. And I told me to tell you about this one. Education in critical thinking. Actually, Carl Sagan told me. To teach not what to think, but how to think, how to be an independent thinker, to always question the source of knowledge and not to take an authority for a truth claim, not to confuse those two things. So thank you, Science World. Thank you, audience. You've been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I think we have a question and answer period, so we can, okay, that's great. Yes, sir. Sure.
I think I can just yell loud enough. Is there any evidence for a genetic link to conspiratorial thinking other than, mental conditions like paranoid schizophrenia, something like that? Is there a genetic component to it?
Not that I've come across. No, so sorry. The question was, is there a genetic basis for conspiracy thinking? And my answer is, I haven't come across any research that suggests there is. We've got microphones, too. So there's a question over there.
I don't think I need the microphone. How did Wakefield's article get into the Lancet in the first place? Do they not have review procedures?
Very good. So the question, excellent question. How did Andrew Wakefield's article get accepted to a prestigious journal like the Lancet? Don't they have review procedures? And the answer is yes, they do have review procedures. And they have multiple levels of review. It goes out typically to 2 different peer reviewers who are experts in the field. And it may even go to more beyond that. It's not entirely clear how it got accepted. I mean, part of the answer probably is that he falsified data, right? So most reviewers are going to assume that you're being truthful. There's another important point, too. Wakefield had 11 other co-authors, all of whom are experts, well-established people in the field. So, there's going to be an assumption of integrity. That's part of the problem, right? Now, 10 of those collaborators, I was going to say co-conspirators, 10 of them actually came out with a statement saying, we no longer associate our name with this research. They, too, were duped by Wakefield. So that's part of the answer. But I think the other one is the scientific review process has to also change. It has to be improved because this is not the only time this has happened. And I think we're giving our colleagues too easy a ride sometimes, and we have to do more due diligence. And I think there's other professors here who might have things to add to that if they want to. Yes, sir.
So
going back to the conspiracy about world with the 9/11, do you have any thoughts on that?
The question is, do I have any thoughts about the 9/11 conspiracy? Can you be a bit more specific? And thoughts in what sense?
On if it was Al-Qaeda or was somebody in the United States government.
Right. Do you mean me personally, or?
Yeah, personally. Or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, I think 9/11 was a conspiracy. Okay, it was a conspiracy of 19 terrorists who were funded by Osama bin Laden, who carried out a secret plot to destroy the World Trade Towers and hit the Pentagon. That was the conspiracy, and they pulled it off.
Was there any financial gain?
No, I don't think they had any financial gain per se. They did it for political gain, right? I mean, certainly. Now, there's a nuance to that answer. A lot of terrorist groups or political movements themselves have internal conspiracy theories that motivate their actions. So almost certainly Al-Qaeda believes in several conspiracy theories about Jews, about Americans, about the West trying to take over Arab lands, about the humiliation of the Muslim people. There's all kinds of conspiracies that they possess that then help get them to the place where they're going to seek revenge, and the revenge is going to be justified in their monological worldview.
Thomas Kuhn argued that within science you have a lot of inertia that builds up around a view, a theory, and that the people in a lot of power hold very tightly to that view. And then it takes a great deal of counter-evidence to topple that view and the people who hold dearly to it. I just wonder how that fits into the idea of conspiracy.
Yeah, very, very much. So Dr. Bernstein's question was that a philosopher of science named Thomas Kuhn held the view that even in science, scientists will hold on to theories and defend those theories even though there is evidence against those theories. And sometimes very good evidence. Is that a fair statement of your question? And so why is that? And is that similar to what we're talking about? And in my estimation, it is very similar to what we're talking about. We are talking about belief systems, and scientists have belief systems. Science is first an act of the imagination. It is first an act of theorizing about how the world works. A scientist sees observations or has thoughts and says, I think this is the way of the world. Where science deviates from conspiracy theories or other forms of knowledge, of epistemology, is that science has a method, the scientific method, that is independent of the scientist, because it's a community enterprise, and it's a method of critical thinking and of argumentation and of logic and of observation that is designed to be self-correcting over time, that is designed to be open so other scientists can come and repeat your experiment, can challenge your theories in the open at a conference or at a public talk or in the journals or in books. So in that sense, the scientific method keeps scientists reasonably honest. But still, scientists are human, and they also wield a lot of power. So they control the journals, they control the funding agencies, they teach at the universities, they tell you which textbooks to read. So to some degree, even the scientific method is not powerful enough often to overcome the cherished beliefs of scientists. And very often they're in a conflict of interest, right? They have their own theory. I just gave you my own theory earlier. I'm going to defend that theory, not to the death. Not mine anyway, maybe yours, right? So to that degree, another scientist, the quantum physicist Max Born said, in science, the way to effect profound change of a whole different way of looking at the world, so the Newtonian view gets replaced by the quantum view, for example, or Einstein's relativity theory is a totally different way of looking at things. The way to effect that change is to wait for the powerful scientist to die. And then the new scientists, the next generation, the ones who aren't as entrenched in those ways of thinking and all the interests that go with that, are more open to accepting the new viewpoints. Yes, sir.
That's an interesting thought there. Does it expand to religious believers as well?
For some reason, I don't want to answer that. I don't know why. This is the part, this is what educators always do. Watch this. What do you think?
What set me up thinking about it was how to speak to a conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
And I have the same difficulties
Yes.
often speaking to
Yes.
strong
Yes.
religious.
I think a person could make the case that religion is a monological belief system, and a very powerful one. And you know how they deal with heresy. Sir?
Dr. D, riddle me this.
Uh-oh.
A little earlier in your presentation, you mentioned they turned the pyramids upside down.
Yes.
What conspiracy theory you just saw?
The question is, earlier in my presentation, I made a claim that that if the aliens wanted to demonstrate their existence and power, they would have simply gone and done something that no one else could have done, like turn the pyramids upside down. And the question is, what
Conspiracy theory you just saw?
what conspiracy theory have I just solved? Well, I've solved the conspiracy theory that we don't have good evidence that aliens exist. There's a pyramid conspiracy theory. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently, so, right?
Question back there.
Just in your own opinion, what kind of, when you think about shows like The X-Files, or that HBO one where people disappeared, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What effect do you think they have
Yeah.
on just the average?
I'm not sure. So sorry. The question is, what do I guess as an educator, what do I think about shows like The X-Files or other shows that push conspiracy theory views and do it, in a very interesting way, right? I enjoy those shows. I love, all kinds of movies that have those themes. But I come at it as a scientist and as a critical thinker. So, I'm enjoying it, but I'm not saying it's real necessarily, or I might be questioning it, right? But I think for people who don't have that alternative way of thinking about things or questioning what they are reading or listening to, there's a danger in that. So, and again, you know what my solution is, right? More critical thinking, more education, right? And not just any education. I have to be careful on this. There is evidence that in the Republican Party, that the more educated you are and you're a Republican, the more you believe climate change is a hoax. And that's probably because they just read more, or they're thinking about the theories more and looking at alternatives and so on. So education per se is not a solution, but a certain kind of education will help, I hope. And we have one more question. Dr. Bath.
Julia. About the healthy scientific attitude. That on one hand we get the theme emerging that conspiracy theory laugh at them. That healthy scientific attitude, we do not buy into those. But sometimes there may be some germ of truth to it, and maybe 20, 30 years later, people may laugh at us that, oh, you guys were laughing, but this was false.
Yeah.
So isn't that a healthier attitude to keep at least one window open?
Yeah.
As they say, that willing suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
That little bit openness, that maybe not simply discounting, because otherwise it gives rise to just a strong dogma in scientific thinking too.
Yeah. So the question, which is a great one, is, as scientists, as educators, even as citizens, shouldn't we always be a little open-minded, even to someone proposing a conspiracy theory? Because if we're not, we're being dogmatic too. We're closing off the possibility that there may really be something going on. And my answer is absolutely that's true, right? But I think, I come back to Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And another one, you should always have an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. There's two things going on here, right? There's the creative thing, the imaginative thing. Let's theorize about the world creatively, and then let's test our theory against the cold, disciplined, critical thinking approach to make sure that we haven't deluded ourselves. But it starts with creativity. And that's why I say conspiracy thinking is a good thing. It's a natural thinking, way of thinking, but it can go too far. And it goes too far under the conditions which I described, which is a sociocultural environment which pushes it in that direction and so on. And I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.